They thought he was asleep. But Steve Jobs opened his eyes one last time. His family leaned in, quiet, unsure if it was really happening. Then he looked past them, past the room, and whispered, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Those were his final words. But what people forget is what he said before that. Because in the months leading up to this moment, Steve had started talking differently, not like a CEO, like a man who was realizing he might have missed something. Not money, not success, but the ordinary things. Time with family, real joy, quiet. He said, "I reached the pinnacle of success in the business world, but aside from work, I have little joy." That sentence hit like a confession. It came from him, the guy who built the most valuable company on earth, the guy who could have anything except more time. And in those final days, something started to crack. He began writing about love, about death, and how the chase for more can leave you with less. He warned, don't let the pursuit of wealth numb you to what's really important. In this video, we will show you the story of his spiritual life and his biggest regrets. You'll see how his early obsession with perfectionism and mindfulness shaped his decisions, and how, over time, he started to drift away from those values. By the end, you'll see just how easy it is to chase the wrong life without noticing until it's too late, and you will have the opportunity to avoid the mistakes he did. But to understand where those regrets came from, you have to go back, before the world listened to every word he said, back to a dusty garage in 1970s Palo Alto. The garage looked like any other quiet suburb, and inside a one-story home on Chris Drive, a revolution was being born. The garage was a mess, cables snaking across the floor, old parts, soldering irons, no budget, no business plan, just two guys with wild hair and bigger ideas. Jobs wasn't raised religious, but he wasn't just materialistic either. He asked big questions. Early on, he was obsessed with spiritual books, Zen Buddhism, autobiography of a yogi, Ram Dass. He went to meditation retreats. He did long fasts. He even flew to India with nothing but a backpack, hoping to find a guru who could explain life's big mysteries. And yet, ironically, the more he searched for inner peace, the more his hunger for control seemed to grow. When he came back from India, he had a shaved head, wore robes, spoke softly for a while, but something had shifted. His eyes were sharper, the gentle curiosity was still there, but it had been overrun by drive. The gentle curiosity was still there, but it had been overrun by drive. He no longer just wanted to understand the universe. He wanted to bend it. That's where the obsession started. And it wasn't just obsession with the product. It was with everything. He'd explode over a single screw being misaligned. He rejected 50 shades of white paint before choosing the one for a computer casing. He called his employees idiots, sometimes to their faces. He once told a designer, "This is garbage, you're a bozo, start over." And when people pushed back, he didn't soften, he doubled down. Because to Steve, anything less than perfect was pointless. The outside world saw this as genius, that famous reality distortion field. They saw the brilliance, the success. But inside, something was already breaking. See, when you pour yourself entirely into your work, when you treat the product as more sacred than the people around you, you start to lose track of what you're really building. And yet, at the same time, he was still talking about changing the world, still quoting Zen monks. He kept talking about simplicity, mindfulness, elegance, but in real life, his world was anything but. However, there was a gap growing between what he said and how he lived. He once gave a speech about staying hungry, but in real life, he was already starving, not for food, but for peace, for connection, for rest, for anything real outside the glow of a screen. He thought he was just being excellent. He didn't see what it was costing him. But in that garage, something sacred was being traded away. His life looked beautifully designed, but it worked in a way that was breaking him. And one day, he would look back at this time, the golden age of youth, vision, fire, and feel something most people never expected. Not pride, but pain. Because even with all his brilliance, he didn't see what it was costing him. Not yet, but he would. In just a few short years, everything changed. Apple wasn't a garage dream anymore. It was a rocket. And Steve Jobs was riding it straight to the moon. By 1980, Apple had gone public. Just as he reached the top, a trap door was opening under his feet, and he couldn't see it yet. And Steve, a 25-year-old college dropout, was worth over $200 million. That's not a typo. $200 million. He wore turtlenecks and sandals. He walked barefoot into boardrooms. He meditated in the morning, but chaos still followed him. To the outside world, he was a young visionary, a genius, but inside the company, it was chaos. Steve was no longer just a kid with ideas. Now he had power, and he used it like a blade. He demanded the impossible, constantly. He'd ask an engineer to redo an entire circuit board because he didn't like how it looked, even if it would never be seen. He once fired someone in an elevator, didn't like their vibe. He'd tell designers their work was garbage. No taste, he'd say. Try again. He'd interrupt meetings to criticize someone's facial expression. He'd reject 20 logo designs, then come back the next morning and say, "None of this is beautiful enough to represent who we are." It wasn't just about building a great computer, it was about building his vision, exactly how he saw it. No compromise, and people followed him. Because buried underneath all the chaos was something magnetic. He did see the future. He did care about craft. He wasn't in it for quick wins or gimmicks. He wanted to create something timeless. But even as the company soared, Steve's personal life was quietly crashing. There was a woman, Chris Ann Brennan. They met in high school. She believed in him before the world did. She was there in the garage. She was there when no one else thought this hippie tech kid was going anywhere. But by the time Apple went public, she was alone and pregnant with Steve's child. When their daughter was born, her name was Lisa. Steve denied she was his, publicly, repeatedly. Even after a paternity test said otherwise, he made excuses, said it wasn't the right time, said he didn't know what he wanted, but the truth, he didn't want to look backward, didn't want anything slowing him down, because in his mind there was no room for mess, no room for softness, no room for a crying baby and a complicated relationship, not when he was building the future. So he shut the door, paid her a small check, moved on. And yet, he named the next Apple computer Lisa. The engineers said it stood for Local Integrated Software Architecture, but everyone knew. It was her name. Everyone suspected, and later Jobs admitted, it probably was. He couldn't admit it out loud, but somewhere, deep down, he knew what he was giving up. But he just pushed harder. Apple released the Macintosh.
It does all the things you'd expect a business computer to do. It does a lot of things you wouldn't expect a business computer to do. And it does some things no other business.
It was beautiful. Literally, it spoke when you turned it on. The marketing was genius. The 1984 Super Bowl ad is still iconic.
Of the information purification directives, we have created for the first time in all history a garden of pure ideology where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of vain contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 20 2024, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And Steve? He stood on stage like a rock star, crowd cheering, spotlight glowing, future unfolding before him. But backstage, his team was falling apart. People were quitting, others were burning out. The pressure was relentless. And Steve was cracking under it. He meditated less, slept less, listened less. He told himself it was worth it, that the product was everything, but the truth? He was chasing something he couldn't name anymore. And here's the misdirection most people miss. We think this was Steve Jobs at his peak, but the feeling was completely different. People who worked with him say it now. There was a weight in the air, like something was off, like the faster he climbed, the more of himself he left behind. Some success shines on the outside, but rots you from the inside. And Steve Jobs was starting to feel that hunger. He didn't know it yet, but the life he was building was going to cost him everything that mattered. And the very company he helped build, it was about to push him out. But that's the next chapter. Right now, in this moment, he's on top of the world, but inside, he's alone. The phones are ringing, the papers are reporting, but Steve Jobs isn't celebrating. He's packing up his office. After years of building, pushing, dreaming, he's being forced out of Apple, fired, from the company he started, in his garage. And it wasn't just a disagreement, it was betrayal, it was personal, because it came from people he trusted, people he hired, people he believed in. At the center of it all was a man named John Scully. Steve had recruited him from Pepsi. He famously asked, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" Scully said yes. But 3 years later, he led the board in pushing Steve out. Why? Because Steve was too much, too intense, too unpredictable. Brilliant, yes, but also volatile, impossible to manage. He clashed with teams. He refused to compromise. He lost millions on the Lisa project. And after the Macintosh launched, sales were disappointing. The board wanted control, stability, and Steve, he was a wild card. So they voted, and just like that, he was out. They didn't just fire him, they erased him, like he'd never existed. Just 30 years old, no job. He walked out of Apple quietly, no goodbye speech, just gone. He went home, alone. And for the first time since he was a teenager, he had no plan. Can you imagine that? Spending your whole life chasing one dream, and then watching it get ripped away while the world keeps turning like nothing happened? That kind of silence, it's deafening, and it messes with your mind. Because if Steve wasn't the CEO of Apple, then who was he? What was left? He didn't know. He stopped talking to people. He stopped answering calls. He wandered around the Bay Area, sitting in parks, eating at diners, staring into space. The world still saw him as the tech golden boy, but he felt like a ghost. And here's the part no one talks about. He could have quit. He had the money. He could have disappeared to an island and lived out the rest of his days in comfort. But he didn't, because deep down, under the anger, under the pain, he still had something burning inside him, something unfinished. But first, he had to sit with the shame that maybe he wasn't ready to lead. That maybe the way he treated people, the bridges he burned, the walls he built, all came back to bite him. It wasn't karma, it was a consequence. And in that quiet, ugly space, Steve Jobs had to ask himself a question he'd never really faced before. If I'm not Steve Jobs the visionary, then who am I? The answer didn't come quickly or cleanly. There were dark days, angry days, days where he said nothing to anyone. But slowly, he started building again. Not a company, not a product, himself. He stopped running and started listening again. He reflected. He went back to that 19-year-old kid, the one who used to sit cross-legged at ashrams in India, searching for stillness, asking questions that had no answers. And somewhere in all that stillness, he found something surprising: freedom. Because for the first time in over a decade, no one expected anything from him. No board to please, no headlines to chase, just silence. And in that silence, he found clarity, not about tech, not about design, but about himself. He realized he didn't want to win for revenge. He wanted to build for love, for beauty, for the joy of creation. And he started sketching again, on a napkin, then on a whiteboard, then with a small team. No deadlines, no stockholders, just vision. That seed would grow into something new, but he didn't know that yet. All he knew was this: he'd lost everything, but maybe that loss was the best thing that ever happened to him.
The thing I would say is, when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But life, that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it, versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
And this time, he was building something different. It wasn't a garage. It wasn't Apple. It was called Next, a sleek black cube of a company aimed at universities and scientists, high-end elite machines. The vision? To build the future of computing, again, from scratch. He poured $12 million of his own money into it. But what if the failure he feared was the only thing that could save him? Handpicked a small team, designed every corner of the product, down to the screws you couldn't even see. And if Apple had softened him, Next brought the edge back. He was intense, even more than before. He banned color printers in the office because they distracted people. He redrew designs 50 times just because a shade of gray felt wrong. He fired people in elevators if he didn't like their energy. Steve Jobs wasn't healing. He was channeling pain into product, control into design, loneliness into ambition. But Next didn't change the world. The machines were beautiful, the software advanced, but they were too expensive, and no one was buying. And yet, he didn't give up. He thought he'd lost everything, but there was still one thing left to lose: himself. At the same time, he was building something else, something animated, something strange. A little company called Pixar. You've heard of it, but back then, it was nothing. Just a group of nerdy engineers playing with digital rendering. They had no idea what they were doing. Steve had bought them from George Lucas almost as an afterthought. He thought maybe it'd help with computers, but he understood vision. He pushed for original characters, emotional arcs, a full-length film. People thought he was crazy. An entire movie made on a computer? That's not possible. But Steve didn't care. He wanted to feel something. And eventually, so did they. Little did he know, a cartoon cowboy would teach him more about love than any Zen monk ever could. That little movie? Toy Story, 1995. It was the first fully computer-animated feature film, and it made history. It didn't just succeed, it exploded. Kids laughed, adults cried, theaters were packed. Pixar wasn't just a tech experiment anymore. It was art. And Steve, he was back on the map. Pixar taught the world how to tell human stories, but the man behind it couldn't even hug his own daughter without flinching. Suddenly, the man who'd been exiled was now connected to two of the most creative companies in the world. And yet, something still felt off. On the surface, he was winning. Money flowing, headlines buzzing, Pixar soaring, but behind closed doors, same patterns. At Next, people were walking on eggshells. He still had outbursts, still dismissed opinions he didn't like, still obsessed over things others couldn't even see. Even at Pixar, where storytelling was the goal. And that was hard, because Steve Jobs had spent his whole life trying to control things, and now the success he wanted most was coming from a place where he had less control. Was that a coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it was a lesson beginning to form, a quiet one he hadn't yet realized, that sometimes the best things don't come from perfection, or control, or pressure. They come from collaboration, from trust, from letting go. But Steve wasn't there yet, not emotionally. He was still learning, still growing. On the outside, he was richer than ever, more admired than ever. But inside, he still hadn't made peace with the one thing he'd always pushed away, himself. By the late 1990s, Apple was dying. The company Steve Jobs had once built from nothing was bleeding money. Product lines were a mess. The brand had lost its soul. Stock was plummeting. Morale was worse. One headline read, "Apple without Jobs, is it worth saving?" And then the phone rang. They asked him to come back. Not with parades, not with apologies, just business. Apple had bought Next, mostly for its software, but what they really needed was something bigger. They needed him. And in 1997, after more than a decade in exile, Steve Jobs returned to Apple. But this second chance wasn't redemption, it was a test, and the cost would be higher than he ever imagined. But this time, he walked in differently. No ego, just black turtleneck, blue jeans, and a quiet look in his eyes that said, "Let's get to work." The first thing he did? Simplify. There were over a dozen product lines, printers, PDAs, cameras, all confusing. He cut almost all of them. He stood in front of a whiteboard and drew a simple 2 and 2 grid. Consumer, professional, desktop, portable. 4 products, he said. That's it. People were stunned. Cutting that deep, that fast? But Steve knew. When everything's important, nothing is. What came next was beautiful. The iMac. A bright-colored, translucent machine. All in one. Friendly, fun. It was like nothing else on the market, and it sold like crazy. Apple was breathing again. Then came the iPod. White, minimal, 1,000 songs in your pocket. It wasn't just a gadget, it was cool. It made people feel something. For the first time in years, people were talking about Apple again. Not as a joke, but as the future. And Steve, he was back in his element, designing every corner, obsessing over fonts. But if you looked closely, there was something new in him, too. He still demanded excellence, still pushed hard, still had the fire. But the tone was different. He wasn't just building products, he was building meaning. He talked more about the why. He used words like emotion and experience and soul. The world saw magic. But inside Apple, birthdays were missed, marriages collapsed. People were burning out, trying to meet a man's vision, while he couldn't even make eye contact at the dinner table. He gave speeches about artists and craftsmen, about love and simplicity, about how computers could empower people. This wasn't the same Steve from 1985. This was a man who had tasted humiliation, who had stared into the void and rebuilt himself, a man who lost everything and chose to return anyway. And yet, the question lingered. Was he truly different on the inside, or just older? Because while the company was healing, his personal life was still complicated. His relationship with Lisa, the daughter he once denied, was slowly improving, but it had taken years, years of avoidance, years of pain. His new family, his wife Lorene, and their kids gave him some peace, but even they said he could be distant. But rebuilding connection, that was harder. Still, something in him was shifting, not all at once, but piece by piece. This second chance at Apple wasn't just about saving a company, it was about saving himself. Not from failure, but from becoming someone who only lived to build and forgot how to be. By 2007, Steve Jobs wasn't just back, he was untouchable.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. We're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is.
People willing to stay out all night long to make sure they got their hands on an iPhone today.
Normal iPhone, is it?
This is just a normal iPhone 6. Yeah, I didn't want
Okay. All right. We're doing the reveal. His name's Jack.
Really want this new one. Take a look at this guy. Sky Eye flew over the Apple Store in Highland Village.
The iPhone had launched, and the world changed overnight. A phone, a computer, and an iPod, all in your pocket. People lined up around the block, not just for a product, but for a feeling. In that moment, Steve was no longer a comeback story. He was the story. He'd gone from dropout to outcast to emperor. And yet, with that power came something else. The obsession returned, but sharper this time, more intense. Steve would obsess over every detail, how the phone felt in your palm, how the icons bounced when you opened them, how the inside of the circuit board looked. Even though no customer would ever see it, he wanted perfection, always. And if it came at a cost, so be it. Former Apple employees began to speak out, not with bitterness, but with exhaustion. They talked about missing birthdays, 31 weddings, their own children growing up. One engineer said, "I remember working 90-hour weeks and still feeling like I wasn't doing enough." Another said, "My wife left me, and honestly, I don't blame her." There was a culture of excellence, but also a culture of fear. Deadlines were brutal. Expectations were crushing. Burnout wasn't a risk, it was normal. And yet Apple kept winning. The iPhone exploded. Then came the App Store, then the iPad, iTunes, iCloud. It felt like Steve was bending the future to his will. But while the world admired his genius, behind closed doors, his personal life told a different story. To connect, trying to understand each other. But old wounds ran deep. Lisa later described, moments when he'd be warm and generous, offering advice, sharing books, and then other moments when he'd ignore her for days or say something cruel without even realizing it. She said it felt like she had to earn his love again and again. Even at home, he wasn't really there. His wife, Lorene, held things together. She was the anchor, calm, but even she admitted life with Steve wasn't easy. He was brilliant, but unpredictable, romantic, but moody, present, and yet never fully here. It's almost like the same pattern that built the world's most valuable company was the same one that quietly kept walls around his heart. He saw the future, but missed what was right in front of him. Still hungry, still trying to prove something he never quite put into words. He was winning, but at what cost? Because the world saw the headlines, but behind the curtain, the cracks were growing, and soon something would enter his life that no amount of brilliance could outthink. Not even Steve could design his way out of this one. But what happens when the dream turns on its maker? Soon, you'll see the moment Steve's entire world flipped. Offstage, a storm had already begun. Something invisible, something deadly. We all thought Steve Jobs was unbeatable. He'd mastered tech, markets, even perception. But what he couldn't outdesign was a cell in his own body. Back in 2003, 4 years before that iPhone keynote, Steve had gone in for a routine scan, and they found something, a shadow on his pancreas, pancreatic cancer. The man who controlled everything was about to face the one thing that obeyed no one. At first, the doctors thought it might be operable, survivable. But Steve, he didn't act. He delayed surgery, turned to alternative therapies, juices, acupuncture, spiritual diets. For 9 months, he avoided the operating room. He thought he could beat it his way, the same way he'd bent technology to his will. But cancer doesn't care about vision, or simplicity, or industrial design. By the time he agreed to surgery, it had spread. Still, he didn't talk about it publicly. On stage, he looked sharp, thin but sharp, brilliant as ever. He was still announcing iPods, MacBooks, iOS updates, still captivating the world. But behind the curtain, he was shrinking. His diet changed. His energy faded. Close friends noticed, but no one said anything. Because Steve didn't want pity. He didn't want weakness. He wanted control, always control. But this was a battle he couldn't command from a boardroom, and still, he kept going. In 2008, he stood on stage again. Even as his body weakened, his mind stayed razor sharp. He helped design the iPad, oversaw Apple's retail stores, approved every product down to the font size on the box. He pushed through meetings, keynotes, interviews, but there was a clock ticking in the background, and only he could hear it. Lisa later said, he always felt like he had limited time, but once he knew it for sure, he stopped wasting a single second. He could design a $1 billion phone, but not an extra second of life. Still, he didn't slow down, didn't retire, because Steve didn't know how to stop. He knew time was running out. He only knew how to build. He was standing at the very peak, with death quietly waiting at the edge of the stage. And as the crowd cheered, he kept smiling. He kept holding the mic. He kept pretending he wasn't running out of time. By now, Steve Jobs was no longer just a man. He was a myth. The iPhone had changed the world. Apple had become the most valuable company on earth. But in private, something was crumbling. His body was failing him. He tried to fight it in the only way he knew how, control. He turned to fruitarian diets. He drank carrot juice religiously, fastings, herbal therapies. He visited energy healers in Switzerland, sought wisdom from Zen monks in Japan. At one point, he believed that just thinking differently could heal him. But cancer isn't interested in mindset. And by the time he finally agreed to surgery, it was too late. The clock wasn't ticking anymore, it was screaming.
In 2009, he received a liver transplant. It bought him time, but not peace. The surgery left him weak. He became visibly gaunt. He wore multiple layers to hide his frame. He stopped appearing in public as often. And for the first time in his life, he stopped talking about the future. He began reflecting, thinking, quietly, not about chips or screens or retail spaces, but about people. He got closer to his wife, Lorene, started having long conversations with her at night, sometimes about Apple, but more often about life, about meaning. He began reading again, old spiritual books he had once skimmed. He spent more time at home, started sitting at the dinner table with his kids, not just passing through, but really sitting, present. Lisa, his eldest daughter, had written a memoir years later. She said, it was like he was learning how to love in real time.
Slowly, awkwardly, but with his whole heart. Those close to him said he grew softer, more reflective, more present. He had once denied Lisa was his child, publicly, coldly. Now he was trying to stitch that wound closed, not with grand gestures, but quiet ones. He gave her a room in his house, helped her apply to college, sat through awkward silences, and stayed. He didn't always get it right, but he tried. And sometimes, that's enough. There was one story where he walked into the living room, looked at his kids, and just said, I didn't spend enough time with you. No excuses, no spin, just the truth. But that was the version of Steve Jobs people rarely saw. Not the showman, not the CEO, but the man. The father who missed birthdays, the partner who was hard to love, the friend who didn't always call back. Now, he wanted to fix it. But time wasn't waiting anymore, and the very control he built his legacy on was slipping through his fingers. Still, he kept showing up. To Apple meetings, to family dinners, to doctor's appointments, to life. Even when it was hard to stand, even when he knew he was nearing the end. Because Steve wasn't just facing death, he was facing himself. In 2005, 6 years before his death, Steve Jobs gave a speech at Stanford. It became one of the most shared speeches in history.
When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, if you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. At the time, people thought it was about quitting their jobs, starting a company, being bold, and maybe it was. But looking back, maybe it was also Steve talking to himself. Maybe that speech wasn't just advice. Maybe it was also a quiet confession. We'll never know for sure, because now, facing the end, he started seeing the whole picture. Yes, he built the most powerful tech company in the world. Yes, he changed how we communicate, but he also missed his daughter's childhood. He pushed away friends. He tried to control everything and ended up alone in many moments. He chased greatness, but he may have missed life. He spent decades trying to design the perfect phone, only to realize he couldn't design time. He once said, "I didn't see it then, but I see it now." That one line said everything. A man so focused on the next thing, he almost missed the real thing. October 2011, Palo Alto. The hospital room is white, still, almost too quiet. No more product launches, no thunderous applause, just the sound of machines and breath. Steve Jobs is dying. He's thin now, fragile, a body once buzzing with energy, now slowly dimming. He's not surrounded by engineers, not designers, not CEOs or investors, just family. His wife Lorene holding his hand, his children seated around him, his sister Mona by his side. This is what the end looks like, not a stage, but a small room, not noise, but silence. And in that silence, Steve doesn't talk about the iPhone. He doesn't mention Apple's stock price, and for once, he has no pitch, no edits, no corrections, just presence. Mona later writes about his final moments. She says Steve looked at each person in the room, then past them, as if he was seeing something else. His final words? "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow," 3 times. whispered. No one knows exactly what he saw, but maybe, in that final second, he finally understood something and missed his whole life. Not a product, not a vision, but something simpler, something quieter. Not long after Steve passed, something began to circulate. A letter, shared online. Emotional, raw, and reflective. Many believed it was written by Steve himself, but it wasn't. His family, biographer, and close friends all confirmed. He never wrote those words. Still, people read it, because it felt true, because in some way, it captured what many saw in him near the end. A man who stopped talking about the future and started holding his kids a little tighter, who traded stage lights for dinner table conversations, who once obsessed over screens and now just wanted to look someone in the eye. So even if the letter wasn't his, the message wasn't wrong. He didn't regret building Apple. He regretted not being more present while doing it. It was in the way he changed near the end. Steve stopped chasing what was next. He stopped trying to perfect the world and started holding his wife's hand more. Started showing up to his kids' lives. Started having real, quiet, human moments, not slogans, just love. He didn't regret building Apple. He didn't regret changing the world. He regretted not being more present while doing it. And that's what made his final years so different. He began to live not through devices, but through eyes, not through screens, but through hearts. Because in the end, Steve Jobs didn't invent the iPhone to make money. He did it to connect people. And ironically, it took dying for him to understand the one connection he had missed, being truly there. When people think of Steve Jobs, they think of the iPhone. They think of black turtlenecks and big stages. They think of sleek design, world-changing ideas, and perfection. But maybe that's not the real legacy, not the devices, not the billion-dollar companies, not even the innovations. What Steve left us in his final moments wasn't a product, because in the end, the man who obsessed over the next thing realized that the most important thing was already there. His wife, his kids, his sister holding his hand. And maybe that's the greatest innovation of all, to realize that presence, connection, love are not features we upgrade, but gifts we choose right now. The irony? He spent his life trying to give us more time, more power, more connection, and only at the end did he understand that the most meaningful interface is eye contact. The most beautiful design is a quiet moment with someone you love. He's gone, but his words remain. And if you really think about it, the greatest thing Steve Jobs ever gave us wasn't something he built. It was something he realized and had just enough time left to pass on.